And now we're off to Ikon Park and we're going to chat with Riley Beveridge. G'day, Riles.
G'day, guys. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, mate. Now, you got to take in the action there at Ikon Park, and your Blues, they got up by 7 points, which I'm sure the Blue Bagger fans will be happy about, but we're looking with our fantasy eyes on. Who caught your eye straight up?
Well, I think the most promising thing from a fantasy perspective was probably Carlton's midfield, I reckon, throughout the day were really strong. I mean, I think there's been some question marks on that midfield since Sam Walsh got injured with his syndesmosis problem that'll probably keep him out for at least the first month of the year. But Patrick Cripps looked good. I thought Adam Chera was probably best on ground. And the most sort of tempting fantasy prospect, I think, from that midfield would be George Stewart, just because he does have that dual position status and he's going to play 100% midfield time with the Blues. I don't think there's any worry about him going back or going forward. They like him through the midfield. I've spoken to a couple of people at Carlton this summer that think that he could be just as valuable to this team as Adam Chera, even though Chera was the sort of blue chip recruit over the off-season. It's just Stewart's ability to tackle, win clearances, win his own footy, that industrious work rate that he's got. They really like that. And that was all on show on Thursday morning. I think he was definitely one of the best on ground, laid a lot of tackles, won a lot of clearances, and probably won 20-odd touches as well.
So we're looking at roles, and the key role there is that he's going to be a midfielder, and that's nice, and 100% midfield time, as you said. We'll take that to the bank with plenty of centre bounces that he had. So do you think that role will he do some jobs at all, or do you think he'll have the ability to win his own ball and then obviously get on the outside a little bit too, which I think we saw a little bit of as well?
He might have some jobs. I mean, it's interesting. He had a couple of tagging jobs throughout his early stages in Sydney. It's interesting to see whether or not Michael Voss would employ those tactics as a new coach. I know there's going to be a few question marks around just exactly how he's going to work through that. Port Adelaide didn't necessarily employ a tagger, and he was there for 7 or 8 years, so maybe that's a good sign for him. But I think Hewitt's the type of player that even if he does have to tag an opponent, he can still get off the chain and win his own footy as well. And tagging often means tackles, and I know tackles are a big thing in fantasy, so I mean, it's certainly one to watch for. But I think Stewart's the one that even when Sam Walsh does return to this side, his role won't necessarily change. Carlton were desperate for two-way runners through that midfield, a bit of defensive intent in that midfield. I think you might see, we did see yesterday Patrick Cripps spend a bit of time forward when he left the centre bounce. Adam Chera spent a bit of time forward, which I found interesting. He played deep in the goal for a couple of times. They tried to rotate him out a couple of times, but Hewitt was really the mainstay. So I think he's the one that, even when Sam Walsh comes back into this team, his role won't necessarily change.
Right, well, Hewitt there, 537k, defender mid, he's locked in my side. You talked there about Patrick Cripps. Now, he's had a couple of down years from probably his own personal footy perspective, but also from a fantasy perspective, which makes him pretty cheap this year. Do you think that he would be worth taking a bit of a punt on? Will we see more of the vintage Cripps form?
Well, I know a few of us have been burnt by him before from a fantasy perspective, but I thought he looked really good yesterday. He looked a bit leaner, makes him cover the ground a bit more, and he's still got that trademark sort of physicality and upper body strength, which makes him such a good sort of contested and clearance player. But he was covering the ground a lot more, he was getting it on the outside a lot more, and he looks refreshed. I think he's carried a lot of the burden over the last couple of years in terms of how poorly Carlton's gone as a team. I think the approach that Michael Voss has taken at the Blues this summer in terms of making it a more holistic output, not relying on the individual as much, I think that's really refreshed him. He looks good. He looks comfortable. It's whether or not you trust him long term. I know a lot of people would have had him in their fantasy teams in the last couple of years and thought never again after that. But, I mean, he did as much as we possibly could have hoped for yesterday.
All right, now a couple of other Blues. Just quickly, Zach Williams looked pretty good off half-back. Take out that first year there at the Blues, and will he be on the way up this year?
Yeah, he looked awesome. Carlton has an abundance of sort of running defenders when you add in Sam Doherty and Adam Sard and Liam Stocker when he eventually comes back. So they've got a few of them, but I think Zach Williams is a real weapon down there. Spoke to Michael Voss a couple of weeks ago, and he said that would be his predominant role throughout the year, that he would be a half-back, but if they had to have to flick the lever and play him in the midfield, they would. And they said it wasn't an option they'd taken completely off the table, which is when you compare that with his response to when I asked if someone like a Liam Stocker would play through the midfield, he said no, he'd be a half-back throughout the year. So I think they're open to the idea of him potentially playing through the midfield, but even across half-back, I reckon he won 20-odd touches on Thursday morning and looked really classy. Got on the end of a few sort of clearances when they won the ball through the middle. He was very attacking in the way he rebounded off half-back. So I think he's one to certainly keep an eye on. I'm not sure if you'd trust him having him in your team straight away, but if his performances stack up throughout the early stages of the year, maybe he's one you get in later.
And quickly, Charlie Curnow, he's back. We'll see him in round one, and he's averaged 70 in the past, and he's priced super cheaply. Could you take a bit of a punt with him?
You could. A few worrying signs late in the game. He lived off with a bit of a knee injury and didn't come back. I've checked that out with Carlton after the game, and they've said that he's completely fine, wouldn't even require a scan. So that's a promising sign for his development. The injury factor is a bit of a risk, but I think he's going to have some rust to shake off, definitely. Even though he played 4 games at the end of last year, he's still going to have a bit of rust to shake off. He's still working his way through forming a partnership with Harry Mackay. They haven't played a lot of footy together, but he's certainly going to be the one. And from what I've seen from him throughout the summer, that gets a lot higher up the field, sort of takes a lot of marks on the wing and rotates back to goal. So I think he will win plenty of the footy like he did early days at Carlton. It's just whether or not he will have that bit of rust to shake off early.
Now, the Saints, we don't often take too much into these pre-season games from our premiums, but Jack Steele, being Jack Steele, is he worth paying $1 million for?
Look, maybe. I mean, he was probably their best player yesterday. He didn't do much in the first half, but he worked his way into the game. Just so industrious, so clean, and he's so consistent. We saw that last year when he was my tip for the Brownlow medal at one stage last year, just how good a season he had. And I think with the way St Kilda's midfield operates, they don't have too many blue chip options through that midfield. So he's going to be the one constant, the one ever present through that midfield. They'll rely on him a lot through this year. So he's going to score well because I think he's going to be the one that has to. He doesn't really have too many players stealing the footy off him through that midfield. So I think $1 million is a lot of money to spend, but if you're willing and I think you just know that he's going to produce with the scores. It's just whether or not you can afford to part with that much money.
Now, Jay Gresham's pretty cheap. He's got the mid-forward status, and he played a couple of great games last year before that Achilles injury. How did he look in his sort of return to the field?
I think most importantly, he got through unscathed. I mean, he played a full game, did quite well. He just looks like when he's got the footy, he looks so classy and so much of an X factor, which St Kilda desperately needs. Just whether or not he builds into the season in terms of playing midfield time, I reckon he spent probably 90% forward yesterday. So it goes to show that he's probably going to start the season forward. I mean, I know they want to get him into the midfield as soon as possible because of the fact that, as we mentioned before, they don't have much quality. They've got a lot of work rate and industry to that midfield, but not many A graders through there. So I know they're going to want him to go through there eventually. It's just whether or not they can afford to put him in there straight away with him building up his loads.
Yep, all right. And just finally, Hunter Clark is someone that a few people are keen on. Thoughts on him?
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one because he played across half-back mostly yesterday. I know a lot of people want to see him go through the midfield full-time, but he kind of was one of those ones. I kept an eye on him a few times throughout the day. He sort of drifted across half-back mostly, pushed onto a wing a little bit late in the game, but you'd hope that with Nick Caulfield going out of the side that he can sort of have a bigger role in that team. But yeah, he wouldn't be in my side at the moment just because I'd be worried about him not playing predominantly through the midfield.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Riley. And Blues now premiership favourites for you?
We can only hope, but I think they've still got a bit of work in front of them if they want to play finals first. So we'll go from there.
Legend. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.